Okay, this video is a hermeneutics lesson, how to use the King James Version, that is what we often call the King James Bible, and keyword is how to use it, and this is according to a historic holistic approach. So just write that up there, so this is a how-to video for the Cornet Project class, how to use the KJV. And you know, we have people come our way who tout things, but they have no content. Again, clouds without water, categories without content. So this is according to a historical holistic hermeneutic approach. So how would we do that? Because I think we can accomplish more in just a few minutes in this video for this Cornet Project class than what you'll learn perhaps in a lifetime with those who don't care to use or know how to use or even know in what direction to go. For example, this is my Walter Martin's Cults Reference Bible from 1981. It's a King James edition. He explains in here why he uses the King James Version and talks about all these different groups, occultic type organizations, societies, and orders, but they can't be using the King James Bible, because what confused me or struck me was very interesting was how are all these people so different and so diverse and so far removed from the Bible, scripted orthodoxy, removed from the gospel, removed from a New Testament, New Covenant body of believers, removed from a fellowship into the gospel. They have no idea of baptism being about the gospel, but yet they all have the King James Bible. So that really caused me to think for a moment, well, in the Bible it says that it's not of its own private interpretation, as we were taught in our Missionary Baptist Seminary. Well, it doesn't explain itself is the point, and it's certainly not subject to people who privatize the Bible. So how do we use it and are honest with it in a manner that would demonstrate well, here's a King James Bible, for example, and if you'll go online to iamcornet.org, the books tab, you can scroll down and it's a PDF of Historical Holistic Hermeneutics, a handbook for practitioners. And this reflects Dr. John Penn's hermeneutic approach, holistic approach, and it's a PDF at no cost to you. You can go to baptistlamp.org, go to Lamp Theological Institute, you can download this as well. It's to be used, print it out, hard copy it, put it in a 3-ring binder, take it to class with you, and do your homework before you go to your class. So can we apply this and use the King James Version? I'll just share with you a moment. My sons play golf sometimes, and I'll accompany them. Well, I'll just randomly grab a club out of any bag, and sometimes even the type of club, it's irrelevant to me. So they'll say, hey Dad, do you want to use this club or this one, or you should probably use a 4 instead of a 6, or whatever that is. So I told them, I said, my performance level in the game of golf was not yet affected by the club, brand of club, or even the different types of clubs that are there. So I noticed that about a lot of people have a zeal for, let's say, King James only, but not really according to knowledge. They don't really want to use it. So those of you that have come to this class can ask about the King James only controversy. Well, before we become distracted for a moment, let's just talk about how to use the King James Bible, and can we use it? Is it useful? And if we take it and our historic holistic hermeneutics, can we demonstrate the usefulness of rightly handling the Word of God? For example, and this is just very quick, I'll just read this one. My desire for efficiency, I have to be careful because sometimes I can move faster than the so on page 34, for example, well, I'm sorry, not 34, page 31, point number 4, seek first the Bible definition of the term in question. Now let's just stop there and let's call this lesson define our terms. So this is lesson number 1. Lesson number 1, and it's from page 31, and it says seek first, and that would be the Bible definition. Okay, here we go. So just that alone, for example, you might be a King James advocate, you might even pastor one of the Lord's New Testament churches. You're probably ridiculed if you believe in the prevalence of the churches as Jesus taught. You're probably mocked if you believe that the fruit of the Spirit, patient endurance, perseverance, is not that which is of the Spirit, but the Bible says in Galatians 5:22 that the Spirit is the source from which we receive our patient endurance. That's for us as individuals. And then, of course, the prevalence of the Lord's churches. He conducts among his churches and has done so for 2,000 years. So Jesus hasn't lost his gospel. He hasn't lost his baptism. He hasn't lost the fellowship into the gospel. He hasn't lost the congregations who self-examine and self-correct and eat the Lord's Supper in remembrance of him. He hasn't lost his flocks out there, his assemblies who faithfully gather for the full purpose to provoke each other into love and unto good works. He hasn't lost his assemblies who are faithful to go out and disciple all the nations and initiate the student-teacher relationship. So when, here's, for example, here's how a King James user, let's say myself, who has been helped immeasurably by being trained in how to interpret the Bible. And when we attend seminary, we were English speakers, and we would sit in class with King James Bibles in our hands and on our desk there. Well, we communicate in English. So first you learn how to use the King James Bible. Well, for example, let's say if you were to use the King James Bible and you were dragged into that argument about open or closed theism, for example. It doesn't appear that people who have a King James Bible are able to approach this at the first step. Sometimes we can stumble. So some of you have asked me questions, and I noticed we haven't yet defined our term. Where do you get these words in the first place? So when you study hermeneutics and you study systematic, you learn the core elements of these approaches. You learn Bible languages. And when you're asked to first define your terms, point number 4, and this is our first lesson, we don't have a term that we can define from the Bible. So if a user of the King James Bible would first say, well, wait a minute, let's go to the Bible, our King James Bible, let's go to Deuteronomy, let's say 5, and we notice living God. There we go. So now we have found a Bible word, so we don't have to exasperate or waste time. And if you ever go on a website, it's about gives the current birth rates of the world and death rates, and you notice so many people per day, over 130,000, something like that a day, just die and pass on into eternity. So really, if you haven't learned how to use your Bible, you might not be stewarding your time well. So let's just notice here, we have first, you may have to find a term to define, because we can't define, this is called category formation, where someone forms a category. And why would you pick anyway? As I've asked you all before, if you just pick from the cards you're dealt, I would love to play cards with you, because it doesn't appear that it occurs often to people that the deck might have 52 cards in it. So if you hand someone a 2 and a 4, they'll play those cards, I guess. I don't know why that in our personal lives we don't behave the way we do, except in some manners we do. We'll just take the options that are presented us. In politics, it's Republican or Democrat. In our systems of theism and traditions and religious orders, there's Southern and Northern Baptist, there's conservative and liberal, there's black, white, there's right, left. It's just really doesn't reflect reality very well. So here, those of us who would want to know how to use the King James Version and a holistic approach, if we look to define our term, it drives us to reject terms we can't define from the Bible. So now we can just set that aside and go and look at this. Now you can find this phrase in the Bible, I think it's like approximately 30 times, all the way to the last book of the Bible, when the contrast between the living God and idol worshipers has escalated. So there's quite an implication there. So let's go on to number 2 and let's just see what else we can do. If we take a historical holistic approach to the Bible, use biblical interpretation, lesson number 1, page 31, number 4, seek first the biblical definition. So, and you have your PDF version free of charge. You can print that out and begin to use that. And if you don't have, you get your King James Bible out and dust it off and say, you know, instead of just constantly saying King James only, King James only, King James only, King James only, maybe start demonstrating your ability and willingness first, ability follows, to use it. And then notice your credibility, because credibility is very important. So let's go here, for example, Mark 16:16. A lot of people who pastor the Lord's churches are often castigated for not teaching something called baptismal regeneration. So I'll just use that. We'll use it as an example. Let's use Mark 16:16. I mean, can we really use the King James Bible, and can we take a historic holistic approach? Can we, on page 31, point number 4 is to seek first the biblical definition, and when we are approached with something that's called category formation, where someone has formed their own categories which aren't in the Bible, and we have open and closed, we then can look for a word. So now a user of the King James Bible can say from his use of the King James Bible that he's a living theist. I'm a supporter of living God, living theist, and the implications according to the context and the categories in the Bible. So that would be a user of the King James Bible. I will just say it with more credibility than those who would refute it. A user of the King James Bible is a supporter of living theism. So that should be something that you would start recognizing. You say, oh, I notice you must use the King James Bible. Why do you say that? Well, because you say living theism. You talk about the living God and that phrase that it appears in the context of your Bible, and you show the implications of the living God as he's revealed himself to be the living God, and in the context you then posit outwardly those implications to your hearer. So I could tell you use the King James Bible, because you won't know how to tell who uses it, because according to the late Dr. Walter Martin, his book here, he passed away in 1989, this 1981, it seemed like all types of cults use or say they use, but are they really using the King James Bible if they're still not supporters of the gospel, not supporters of baptizing those who believe the gospel, that they don't support a fellowship into the gospel that's about Jesus Christ, the Son of the living God, the one in whom the fullness of the Godhead dwelt bodily? If they're not users of the King James Bible, why do they have it? Well, we might say they're an abuser of it. But if we can't tell who's using the King James Bible, then the person that's advocating it's not using it. If we don't have anything more to say than what the world says, then we aren't anyone other than the world. If we're not in the world, that would make us of the world. So if what we say and teach is of the world, then we are of the world. We are not just, we can't say we're in it like Jesus said. Well, Mark 16:16, let's just not even go any further here. That'll just take a moment. It says, he that believeth and is baptized shall be saved, but he that believeth not shall be damned. Okay, so if we're going to define our terms, first of all, the word saved, and you can look this up. That's from the word sozo. There we go. And you can look that up, blueletterbible.org. That's free of charge. It's an online website. You can click on it as a user of the King James Bible. You can click on that KJV version. You can scroll down. It will tell you. Well, saved does not equal born or fathered. So that's genao. There we go. You can look that up. Oh, and it's worth your time to bother doing that. But now just think of the power of that one thing. If we did what we were taught in hermeneutics by our professor, Dr. John Penn, who labored and toiled in word and doctrine to come back to the classes and to develop a repeatable process that we could use and demonstrate an aptitude, that is, acquire an aptitude. And through our willingness, as my grandmother once said, where there's a will, there's a way. And we could, by the persistence of the fruit of the Spirit, that patient endurance, we can prevail and come to learn and hone our craft and improve. Well, I'm finished talking now. I mean, this is supposedly one of the great controversial texts of all the Bible. You know, it's amazing how alarmists make all this when someone walks in with a King James Bible and, let's say, a repeatable, proven, demonstrated process of biblical interpretation that reflects the integrity to include all the words in the Bible. All of a sudden, they're preaching living God, living theism. They're defining their terms from the Bible. They're placing it in the context. They're showing the implications. They're walking through a text over which so many people stumble, and it's just a walk in the park for us. So, again, let's go to another text. I'm just trying, because my super giant print King James Bible, the thumb tags aren't the thumb tabs here. They're not super giant print. So I don't know who this was that produced this super giant print, because I really love that. I need that so I could preach and read from it. But somebody needs to invent a super giant print thumb index here. So I'm just marked these pages before. But look, Acts 13:48. He said, when the Gentiles heard this, let me back up. For so hath the Lord commanded us, saying, I have set thee to be a light of the Gentiles, that thou shouldest be for salvation unto the ends of the earth. And it says, and when the Gentiles heard this, they were glad and glorified the word of the Lord. And as many as were ordained to eternal life believed. Now, people are troubled by that text unnecessarily, perhaps because they didn't have a pastor that used the King James Bible. So let's view this one, Acts 13:48. So first of all, if you're going to define your term, let's look at that word ordained. There, and you can look that up, blueletterbible.org. Now it's blueletterbible.org. You have to spell that out. My board doesn't allow me to spell it out. But when you look up, but before we look up ordained and before we go to the Blue Letter Bible, notice that doesn't say what? That doesn't say foreordained. And there's words in the King James Bible that say foreordained. But when you look it up, it's not foreknown. It's not, doesn't even have the word for in front of it. It's not fathered. It's not genao. So what's the problem? Because if, as for example, the axiom of Reformed theology, which says regeneration precedes faith, if that's the case, then this should, when we look that up, say regenerated, fathered. It doesn't say foreordained. So we're just talking how powerful it is, someone first who's willing to use the King James Bible, because what's the good of the King James Bible if we're unwilling to use it? And then what good is it if we abuse it? I mean, this is a cult's reference Bible, and it's really striking. I mean, if you just read this, it says cult's reference Bible, King James Version. Even explains in here and talks about why. It says, let me see. Yeah, it says, we have used the King James Version Bible since so many of the cults tracing their origins to the 19th century, when the King James was the standard Bible, used that translation as a base from which to twist scriptures. So Dr. Walter Martin, an early Baptist apologist, was noticing that these occultic groups were abusing the King James Version of the Bible to twist the very scriptures. So he was calling the King James Bible scriptures. That's back when we were free to do that. So what's the use of having our King James Bible and being among people who abuse it if we don't use it? So in this Koine project class, I really don't have a lot to discourage you. I will show you how encouraging it is if you just use it. As we were taught by Dr. John Penn, how many people do you know? It's a good question. How many people do you know even bother to use the Bible? How many people do we know that even bother to develop a repeatable process so that we can know whether or not we are engaging and approaching the Bible in a repeatable manner that comes to an honest result and consequence in our doctrine? So, do you use your King James Bible? Well, let's move on. Maybe we can find another verse somewhere. Let me see, another verse. Let's see. You know, the controversial, very difficult passages in the Bible. Let me see. I may have lost my text. Oh, here's one. 1 Timothy 2:4. Who will have all men to be saved and to come unto the knowledge of the truth. Well, there's one there. First, you all now are ahead of me. I can't keep up with my class now. You guys have gone so far ahead, I don't know what to do. So there's 1 Timothy 2:4, and you already noticed it's sozo. It's sozo, saved, which is not genao, so it's not genao. It's not genao, and then it's conjoined with the word and, that's that kai in the Koine text, but you don't have to go there yet. You don't even have to go there at all, except for the fact that this is a pastoral letter. Remember, in hermeneutics, what's our genre, what's our context? So this is a pastoral letter. So he's speaking to Timothy, a pastor of, let's say, the church in Ephesus. So now we know who he is. He's a young pastor. This is a letter from the missionary Paul, the one sent forth. And Paul and Cephas and Apollos are pastoring multiple churches. Paul said that he was laboring in experiencing all that distress or stress of all the churches. He told Timothy that he was enduring all things for the sake of the elect. Those are the ones in those churches. Those in the churches are the called, the elect, and the faithful. So there's no mystery there about who are the called, who are the elect, who are the faithful. Those attributes belong to those who heard the gospel, believed it, were fathered through it, came out, severed our ties through scriptural baptism, and now anti-typical immersion, for example, which means our baptism corresponds to the flood. So we stand in type with relationship to the world as Noah did in actuality after the flood. Noah was saved through water. There's another text right there. It didn't say fathered through water. He was saved through it. So really, if you use the King James Bible and you actually were consistent and honest and used hermeneutics, and as I say, this holistic approach, people would know if you used it, because we all know when someone abuses it. And I hate that I didn't have that up here where I could just call on it. It's just this little cart here. Well, I'll just set it here and see if I can be more professional in my presentation. But here I have an entire book. This is the King James Bible right here. And in it, Dr. Walter Martin shows all the abuse of the scriptures. Okay, well then, we have a King James Bible coming out that shows all of these were placed. Now that we have e-books and PDF format, for example, we're importing all of the apologetics from Answers in Koine, iamkoine.org, I am Koine apologetics, showing all these solutions and how there's no contradiction in the scriptures, for example. And that'll be it'll be a large book, but it'll be the entire King James Bible in English, the King James English Bible, that is, and it'll have all the notes in it that show the use of the scriptures. And again, how people are not, we should notice if you use a user of the King James Bible. So let me just stop right there with that one. and then we don't have to go over any more, like number 5, for example, if we want to end with that big one, John 20:31. If you use the King James Bible, you'll notice the word believe is there. Believe, and then believing. And as you would have been taught, and I'm passing it on to you as collateral grace, when you discuss, let's say, regeneration precedes faith, then you go to passages that speak of that. And when you say the gospel first, then a person believes, well, you have a text that actually says that in the King James Bible. And when you go to 1 John 5:1, for those of you that use your King James Bible, 1 John 5:1, you have believeth. And when you look that word up, you'll notice that that is the same word here, believing. Then you'll notice that there is no text anywhere in the Bible, and you can demonstrate it from your King James Bible, that places regeneration before the finite verb believe. The gospel before the finite verb believe, the act to believe, simplest form of action. And you can read in John 20:31. So when people say that they're users of the King James Bible, but they teach things that contradict it, they're not a user of the King James Bible. Whatever words you want to call that, it's not use of the King James Bible. It could be misuse, it could be abuse, but if you actually use it, and it's, for example, why do we hear people banter all the time when we just simply define our terms? And if you don't define the words in your King James Bible, I don't know from where are you receiving your information. And if you're not intending to use the words in the Bible, the King James Bible, that people tout and advocate. So I'm not really against King James onlyism. I just don't know how to be for it, since it doesn't really express the same thing as a King James user, because that movement might not take hold. I mean, we might not see that. That might not ever become a trend, except for those of us who are laboring in word and doctrine. And now we've been given these social media platforms where, for example, a professor of hermeneutics, that many people don't have that privilege to avail ourselves. And those of us who did have the great honor to be so highly favored by God to have a hermeneutics professor who labored in word and doctrine and developed a repeatable process that we could become a skilled practitioner in it, become a subject matter expert with specialized knowledge and practice it, and hone our skills and improve incrementally and demonstrably and measurably as we pastor, so that we have more confidence, more passion to preach instead of less, so that when someone comes along and says, I have an ESV or I have a New American Standard, well, it's like my son's trying to offer me a different golf club to play golf. If I don't really know how to play golf, and I don't, and I have to tell them the club doesn't affect Daddy's play. Well, I'm sure it means something to someone to say they read from an ESV, I call it the easy version, or the New King James, or people carry something around. And that's all well and good. NIV, whatever's out there. There's just so many out there. The thing you might not notice is it's like a red herring. You're just being distracted from, wait a minute, just for a moment, may we stop here for a moment. Did you ever use your King James Bible, before you put it on the shelf and said, hey, I moved on to a New King James Version, or now I moved on to New American Standard, or back to that, or over to this, or now I'm at ESV, whatever. I've taught you all, don't bring that to this class, because we are practitioners, and you'll notice people that tout different translations don't always use the metric system. They still use the standard rule. They'll say 36 inches is a yard, or they'll talk about a cubit, and that is when you start getting off script, for where most people couldn't convert things to a metric system. Even though someone could say it's more precise, it's more accurate, well, it doesn't seem to be more standard. But until we have some kind of working knowledge and where we can demonstrate a use of the Bible we have, and I really am thankful that the early years of my life, the apologist Dr. Walter Martin used the King James Version and explained why he used it, because so many people abused it. So he could show the gap, the variance, the deviation from the text. Well, how was he able to do that? But for the fact he knew how to use the King James Bible. How did Dr. Penn develop a historical holistic hermeneutic approach, except that he can demonstrate his ability to use the King James Bible, for example, for English speakers, which is what we had when we were in school. We sat there and we go to class, and the translation wasn't our problem. The version wasn't our problem. It was not knowing how to use it, and we were learning how to do that, and we did learn how to do it. So that's enough right there. You don't need any more than that, but this is lesson number 1, page 31, how to use the King James Version according to a historic holistic approach. You have a blessed day.